In this video, we are looking at this Redcat RDS rear-wheel drive drift car. Can I make this from a mid-motor to a rear motor? Is that possible? That is what we are going to be investigating today. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Troy. This is Roadside RC. You'll tend to find me bashing and crawling and drifting and racing, plus doing product review videos and how-tos. And I've been doing a lot with the Redcat RDS drift car. I have the ready to run. This is the kit that I've just been in process of building. And as I'm looking at it, I'm kind of wondering, can I flip this whole center differential and make it a rear motor? And so that is exactly what we are going to try today. And I'm going to measure the weight before and after to see if I can tell a big difference. I think this whole swap might be rather simple. I think I'm going to take this center brace off here that connects the upper chassis to the rear gearbox. Maybe we just don't really need that very much. And then if you look at the chassis as you assemble it, it turns out these 4 screws, everything's symmetrical here. So if I take these 4 screws out, I believe I can actually take the whole center differential and just turn it around a half turn, set it back down, and bang, you know, reconnect some of these. Maybe I'm going to have to move some of these turnbuckles from one side to the other. I think the shocks are probably going to have to move. That's my guess, some of that kind of stuff. But everything's pretty much on the center line, so I think we might come out of this pretty easy. I'm going to give it a shot. So before we get started here, no battery in it, no body on it. We are looking at 50-50 side-to-side weight distribution, 38-62 front to rear, with a total of 1022. So we're going to look to make sure as we flop all this around. Of course, I don't expect the 1022's total weight to really change, but how much of this front to rear balance do we gain? It might not be that much since so much of this weight's already on the rear axle, but we're just going to watch for it. That's what we're looking for. And so I'm going to start by taking off these body mounts, and I'm going to go ahead and take off this center brace and go ahead and probably go ahead and take loose these 4 screws, knowing that I'm going to have to at minimum pop off these ball studs and start swinging everything around. I have the turnbuckles and the shocks all loose. I went ahead and pulled the shocks off the bottom instead of the top. And now I think everything is free to where we're going to take these 4 screws on the bottom out, see what kind of magic we make. All right, the 4 screws are out. So moment of truth. We're going to pick up here and we're going to see. Looks like I need to unplug my ESC just for safety. Can we just turn it around and plop it back in place? Look at that. It looks like they almost made it that way. It looks like the motor sits right in front of everything there. That looks amazing. Let's put some screws in it and see how everything else lines up. Ah, look at that. It actually works. I don't know if you can actually see this on camera, but you can see daylight all around the motor. It's literally like they might have designed it that way. Like, completely fits just beautifully in there. The other thing is the transmission actually is center lined on the axle. So that means that the rear drive shaft here fits in just beautifully into the diff cup. Literally no issues there whatsoever. As I look at these rear turnbuckles, they're now 90 degrees off. They need to be flipped over 90 degrees, which is going to change your measurement ever so slightly. But it looks like the only issue that you really kind of run into is that the shock tower is not also on the center line. If they had just kept that shock tower a little bit closer technically to what would have been the front, it would have been right on the center line and everything would have been symmetrical. But it's just a little bit now, shock tower is just a little bit forward. So if I turn this around a half turn, it's going to throw that alignment off a little bit, but it's not going to hit anything. There's clearance here with that shock tower, so that's not an issue. I did not take the shocks off of the shock tower from the top, and that looks appropriate because if I flop this to the rear, the shock is going to interfere here with the spur gear, so that would be a problem. What I'm going to have to do is take the little ball stud from the rear. Fortunately, the control arms are symmetrical, which means I can just put it in the front and I can have my shock in front of the rear control arm instead of behind it. I have an ESC mount here. Like, it looks like this will all work. Let me get some of this buttoned up and then we'll move on to the next step. Well, that is just wild. It completely and totally works. It turns out Redcat sends you from the factory an easy rear motor conversion kit. And you can now even choose if you want to. You can take off this ESC plate if you want to. I think I'm going to mount my ESC just down here on the center of this now flexi chassis right here in the middle. Just leave it there, nice and low, nice and out of the way. I will note that, you know, some people aren't as much of a fan of flexi chassis. This one does have a little bit of a flex in it now. Some people pay a lot to have a chassis that flexes right there. And so again, here you go, Merry Christmas. I think it'd be pretty easy to fabricate up a little bracket right here. I think I may even 3D print one just for the giggles. 3D print a little bracket that can go from here to here, just to add that stiffness back and give me those choices in case I did want that. And I think I'm gonna get my double-sided tape ready, and I'm gonna get this ESC, assuming my wires are long enough, get this ESC mounted down here. ESC's mounted, motors there, everything's looking great, but there is a catch to this whole thing, of course, which means now that you've rotated the transmission and the motor reverse and forward are backward. For most brushless or brushed setups, that's actually not a big deal at all. If your motor spins the wrong direction, you just swap two motor wires, everything's fine. But you need to be very careful if you are running a censored setup, because censored setups, you can't just do that. It screws everything up. You actually have to go into the programming using your handy dandy program card and actually tell the ESC to spin everything the other direction. Problem, this ESC that I've been using, and I've been using it honestly for years and years, is the Hobbywing XR10 stock spec. It's the 80 amp version, the lower end version, much cheaper, works really well. Can't rotate the motor backwards with it. Can't do it. Can't do it. It won't do the thing. So you have to actually step up to the XR10 Pro, which is the 160 amp version, or the Hobbywing XD10, like drift specific ESC. You have to step up to that one because those both actually, per the instructions, allow you to reverse the motor direction. Or you have to do what I'm going to do, at least temporarily, which is unplug the sensor wire, set it off to the side. The motor, the ESC will run in non-censored mode, and so will the motor. So if I take it into uncensored mode, non-censored mode, I can then swap to motor wires, and then at that point, forward is forward, reverse is reverse, but I lose my ability to control timing, which includes turbo and boost. The other thing that I honestly don't actually fully understand is that the motor comes with timing in it, one direction from 0 to 50, and of course I was actually running that at about 35 degrees. Well, that's now backwards 35 degrees, so I put it back to 0. I don't really know exactly how that works, actually, if I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe if one of you is smarter, timing on the motor when you go and then spin it backwards isn't the timing backwards, and so you wouldn't actually want all that timing in it. So if someone out there is smarter about motors than I am, let me know down in the comments below. I would appreciate it. But for now, everything works. We need to get this thing on the scales to see how much weight difference did we actually make with this move. Moment of truth time. Look at that. I'm actually a little surprised, if I'm honest with you. We were at something like, what was it, 62-ish% at the rear. We actually, by putting it from the front of the axle to the rear of the axle, think about it, it only moved a little bit here. We made a noticeable change on total rear weight, 687 total grams rear weight now, 31% on the front, and removing that ESC plate, removing that connector that was up there, we are now actually under 1,000 grams without battery in the car, but without battery or body, under 1,000 grams. That is getting to be a good number. I mean, we took like 30 grams off of this thing just like that. I am definitely excited to see that number. Now, this is very exciting because my previous drift chassis that I used was also about a 70% rear weight bias. That's where I like it. That's where I've been comfortable driving. Now, you will have to, of course, check your local rules and regulations to see maybe your local track limits, if they're doing any common competition, maybe they limit a rear weight bias. Some of them do that. You'll want to check that. The other thing is this will change a little bit about how the car drives. It's not going to be drastic. It's not a whole huge change, but it is a little bit extra weight on the rear tires, which means it tends to grip up and come out of corners a little bit faster. Just part of the reason why I like it. The second part about it is people say that sometimes it has a little bit more of a pendulum effect. You know, once you get the rear swinging, it wants to swing more, so you got to be a little bit cautious about how hard maybe you throw it into a corner. So that kind of is a thing. So, but the good news here is I literally did this, and you saw me do it for free. You can actually just swap it over rear motor for free. Give it a shot. It took me, I don't know, even videoing it, it probably took me 30, 45 minutes in order to do all of that and explain it. So probably takes you less time. You do it, you try it, you see if you like it, and if you don't like it, you just put it back. Not a big deal at all. So I still have a couple things to do to this though before I'm really ready. I need to get my body mounted up. And a couple things about mounting the body now. Please be aware that the factory body mount, I believe, will no longer fit quite like it was supposed to because that spur gear is now going to hit. So if you had your body mount in the rear position, it's probably going to hit now. So you need to watch out for that. Or you need to figure out something different. I'm going to get to work on that. I need to get a body mounted up on it, and I'm probably going to go ahead and order myself like the XD10 or the XR10 Pro so that I can run the motor backwards with the sensor wire in it, get my turbo and boost back. I would like that overall. I may end up doing a little bit of tweaking to the suspension now. As I continue to move weight to the rear, we're going to end up needing maybe a little bit different. Actually, I like how the rear feels a little bit better now with more weight back there. Front's probably getting a little bit oversprung if you notice. It wants to sit up, but I need to get a battery in it, need to get a body on it and see if it still does it with all those parts on there. So I have a lot more to come on this Redcat RDS, and I'll have a playlist over here of all the RDS stuff that I've done before. So if you have any questions or concerns, you can check that out. I'm going to ask you that if this video was useful for you in any way, if you found it interesting, please share it with somebody. If you could just share it with at least one person out there, I would really appreciate. Help spread the word and help grow what I'm trying to do here. So thank you very much for that. And we will see you in the next video. Goodbye.